Hello, welcome to Build Vibrant Health. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mary, and on the podcast today we have Ray Clemons. He is the owner and founder of Natural Building Works. He's an architecture, landscape, design, build master. So I'm going to let him introduce himself and share a little bit about what you do in the natural building world.
Hey, Mary and everybody. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here on the podcast. My name is Ray Clemons. I'm the owner and founder of Natural Building Works. And what we do is architecture and landscape design build, really focused on low carbon building materials, which are the natural building materials, high performance, which we go up to passive house. There's a lot of things we do, and I'm happy to be here and start to have a conversation about what we do and how that works with the lens of health on top.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And you can see from, if you're listening to this podcast, you won't be able to see it, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see our backgrounds. Ray has some rammed earth behind him, and this is my rammed earth home vision board. And so we both have that in common. We met last year, actually, I guess earlier this year, 2022, in Alfreda, Arizona. If you don't know where that's at, go check it out on a map. I did not know where it was either, right on the border of Mexico. And we met because Ray he still is building this home. But when we originally met, it was doing the groundwork and laying down the foundation for this Strawbale home that was being built in Alfreda.
Right. We do a lot of work with Strawbale and with rammed earth and with natural plasters. That's basically where we're putting our focus these days. And rammed earth is just one of these places that I have a massive love for rammed earth. So I've gone pretty far down the rabbit hole with rammed earth. And so it's something that we really specialize in.
Cool. So for people who aren't familiar necessarily with what rammed earth is, what is it and why do you use it? Why is it one of your favorites?
Right. Well, rammed earth is basically what it sounds like. It is earth that is rammed or compressed into a monolithic wall or something similar to that. Benches, walls, things like that. You basically take a pile of dirt and you put it into a box and you compress it down, and then you pull the box off, and now you have a solid monolithic earthen wall. There's different ways to do this. There's stabilized with cement, there's stabilized with lime. There's some other things coming on the market that are not cement based that are stabilizers. And then there's raw rammed earth, which is the pinnacle of where rammed earth wants to be, and works really well and has worked that way traditionally over time.
So the background that's behind you right now, what type of rammed earth is that?
This is a stabilized rammed earth. It's a cement stabilized with 7% cement. It's usually one of the big questions: how much cement is in your rammed earth? And at this point, we're doing 7%. We'd like to push it down to 3 when we have the chance. And just like most other rammed earth builders, we're looking for that 0 cement version.
And
hopefully we'll find that soon.
Yeah. So where do you source your materials? Obviously, it depends where you're building your home.
And rammed earth can be built in any climate. You just have to take the right precautions considering, the raininess or the sunniness or the snowiness of your climate. But you can take soil from your site. You have to do a lot of work to it. Most of the time, your soil is not suitable as is, so you have to sift it and mix it proportionally. Or you can find a landscape materials yard nearby that has soil that has already been sifted, that you can mix soil and sand and gravel together and create your mix a little bit easier.
Okay, so we're jumping straight into the nitty gritty, and I think that's great. But actually, let's reverse for a moment and tell me about how you got started in natural building works, because I want to focus on the lens of why we're doing this in terms of the factors and role that it plays on our health. Because the homes that we live in right now, most homes are not built or designed with health in mind. They are using really toxic paints and chemicals, and the process for how we build our homes.
Mhm.
That's why I'm here, is because I got really sick from chemicals and mold in my house. And that's what brought awareness to
Mhm.
this. And so tell me a little bit about your story and how you got involved in this.
Sure. Well, I think my architecture journey kind of started in college. I went to University of Arizona for architecture school, and there were a few classes that just resonated with me. There was like a passive solar, or what they would call alternative building materials course. And it was really just one class. It was 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night. So it was like five of us in that class,
Mm,
still not getting much attention in the architecture field at that point. But that kind of opened my eyes to what passive solar design was, using the environment to heat and cool your house, and started showing me that Strawbale building existed, that Earthship building existed, that there were these ways to build that just made more sense to me when it comes to like being responsible for the planet, being responsible for um, economics of reducing your energy bills and becoming kind of self-sufficient. That idea of self-sufficiency through building
mm,
is a really powerful one, that your building could provide everything you need. So from there I just kind of kept walking down that path. um, and our final semester we built a rammed earth house. And so I really got to dive deep into how to build with rammed earth, and all the details and things that go along with that, and just caught the bug at that point to just chase down rammed earth from there. And at that point, after graduating, I just kept I just had this urge to find the best building type, the best way to build. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still learning new things. I'm still finding out new stuff. But it was really like walking down this path of like, how do we make this work better for people? How do we make this work better for the planet? As sustainability became a bigger deal in the world, it became a really important thing for me to be a sustainable builder.
mm.
So, like walking down the path of LEED buildings, LEED certified buildings, and other certifications. I found Passive House at that point and was just like, Passive House is the gold standard. So that's how we should be building for energy efficiency. And Passive House is awesome. It's like a suite of tools that I see, that you can just use all these different tools that they have that really quantify things. So Passive House is a super um, interesting and effective tool to create these healthy environments, these
Mm.
healthy homes that we want to live in. Um,
And tell me,
and
what are some features of a passive house, what you're saying,
mhm,
that make it a healthy home?
yeah, and I think Passive House is one of those. It's one of those certifications that really does have health and comfort as part of it, as part of the philosophy. Um, and you can learn more about Passive House with a Google search. And there's a lot of really great effort going on right now. Passive House Accelerator is a really great community that helped push me a little bit further into the Passive House world in 2020. But it's basically super insulated walls with continuous insulation, high performance windows, continuous fresh air ventilation with heat recovery, which is a really important one that I want to talk more about in this, um, and minimizing your thermal bridges, which also are more important than we recognize through a common sense kind of filter. Um, but yeah, we can talk more about Passive House. I'd like to get more into the details of that. But I think something that also pushed me into the natural building world was permaculture.
Mm,
I was taking a course that was for a sustainable building advisor. And there was, it's one of these courses that's a really broad overview with some specific stuff too. And one of the other, there was like two of us from Tucson in this course that was happening in Phoenix. And one of the participants from Tucson was like, you should really look into permaculture if you're interested into this stuff. So I came back to Tucson and searched it out, and it's one of the premier permaculture teachers and groups in Tucson, the Sonoran Permaculture Guild. And so I signed up to take that course. And I think it's a 72-hour, maybe it's a 172-hour course. So I took that and then recognized like, yeah, natural building is really one of these spaces that's super important for doing this kind of best building practice that I've been looking for when it comes to building with earth and straw and the philosophy behind that, building for people, with people. It's really building a community as well as building houses and
a food system so that people can thrive and have a food forest where they're living.
Yeah, totally. And that kind of, how does your building help create a better place for your humans to live with the human input that's going on with the water that we use? How do we reuse that water to create shade and food for reducing the energy bills of the house, to creating a more comfortable microclimate, to creating more food for humans and wildlife? And you start to add these things together, it makes a really, really convincing argument to build this way.
Absolutely. Yeah. My question is my observation is there's not that many people doing this, or not enough people doing this. So how do you see that shifting? What do you think is going to move the dial in terms of people paying attention to what we're building our homes out of and making this kind of design that you're talking about with food and people in our buildings?
I think it's a really daunting task to say we all should be building this way. I think we all know that we should be building this way because we're in that space, because we decided that this is a great way to build. Right? We've been convinced that this is a great way to build. There's plenty of people out there that haven't been convinced and they don't really care. I think there's a level of caring that is missing, where other things are higher priority. And I think priorities is something that we should talk more about when we come to like buildings for health. But it's easy to get discouraged and see the daunting task ahead of us and just get discouraged and say, well, it's not going to happen, so why even try? But I think the most important thing is to just do something. And if you do something, if it's just for yourself, that's enough. You don't have to do something for yourself and everybody else. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to do something for everybody else. So just do something. If it's helping somebody else build their house, that's awesome. If it's building your own house, that's even better, better for you personally. But, we just need to help each other do the things that we want to do. And, the pages will keep turning and that book will be written.
Totally. I think it can start with something simple like rainwater and gray water harvesting and just learning about that process. Although I did recently hear of someone, I'm trying to remember where this was, but that wasn't allowed where she was living. Are there certain permits and regulations around collecting rainwater, gray water? Obviously, I'm sure there's building permits around natural buildings, and maybe that's one reason why we were in the middle of nowhere in Alfreda, Arizona. Can you talk a little bit more about the things that you face that might be a challenge in terms of like coding and zoning? Is that an area where if we bring more light and more importance to this building, natural buildings that it'll gain more traction. It'll be easier for then the general public to be able to build.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work in the code world in the last 5-6 years. I think 2016, 2015, maybe. The Strawbale code appendix was accepted. And so in the International Residential Code, which is the big fat code building for buildings, it has a Strawbale appendix. It has a tiny house appendix. It has a earthen buildings appendix. There's a new cob appendix coming in the next session in 2022. And there's even a hempcrete section coming in the next session too, the next series 2022 or 2024. So yeah, there are some people working on it. They've been in the industry for a long time. A couple of people that I know are leading that charge are David Eisenberg and Martin Hammer. And they've been leading that charge on the code front for Strawbale for a long time. And now they're able to do these other ones for earthen building.
Really exciting. So that's going to open up a lot of doors.
Yeah, so if you live in any place that uses a international residential code, you can just tell them it's in the book and I want to do this. Can you help me? And the major important thing there is to ask them for help, not to go in saying, you guys won't let me do this and you suck, right? You have to, their job is to help us build safely. And so you have to come in with an open mind and a smile and say, I'd love to build with straw. Can I do this? And if they look at you funny, they say, oh, I've never heard of this before. You say, well, it's in the book. Let me help educate you a little bit. Sometimes you have to be more educated than the plan reviewers about the system. And these things are in the books, so you can read the code in the book, understand it really well, and then go ask for permission and ask for collaboration more than permission.
That makes sense. So you've mentioned a few buzzwords like hempcrete and rammed earth and straw bale. Tell me about the different types of natural buildings that you build and what are the main materials that you're using. And this is probably going to be more specific to Arizona. So feel free to expand, if there's building materials that you would use, say you were somewhere else.
Sure. Yeah, there's kind of a collection of natural building materials. And I think just an overview of what natural building materials might be is they're kind of like a collection of earthen materials. If it's rammed earth or cob or earth bag or adobe, these things are made of raw earth basically, and they don't stray very far from earth as the raw material. If you think in a really big view, everything that is anything is an earthen material. It's made of earth because it came out of the ground at some point. It was just then processed into something else along the way. So these earthen materials are like the rawest form of earth materials. And then there's like organic or cellulose based or something along those realms where it's been grown. So it took nutrients out of the ground, out of the earth, and then through photosynthesis, it turned into a plant that was then grown, that then was processed in a way to become a building material. So these ones are straw bales and wood. Wood timber is like one of the best materials. Just the way you put it together is where things change from calling it a natural material or a conventional or traditional material, which I don't like those words much, like using those words much anymore.
Okay. What words did you use instead?
So there's this whole thing where the words you use matter. And if we could keep calling things conventional materials, then it gives them the power to be the most used material. And we keep calling stick frame stud with fiberglass and sheetrock, and polymer stuccos conventional building, right? We keep calling that conventional building. So it means that that's what's the normal, and what all the other natural building materials is the weird stuff and the alternative to something that's typically used all the time. When the truth is that most of the world lives in an earthen building. And it's just the modern world that lives in these conventional, if you will, stick frame stucco houses that are causing so many problems. So what we should be doing is calling these things by their actual names. If it's a rammed earth building, it's a rammed earth building. It's a stick stucco building, it's a stick stucco building, and even that's a generalization. It's a light timber framed building with cavity insulation and whatever finishes on either side. You can do a stick frame building that is carbon storing and is healthy and it's not growing mold and stuff like that.
Right.
But you can also build it poorly with toxic materials that are super high embodied carbon and all of that. So
totally. Thank you for that distinction. It's the words that we speak are so incredibly important. They literally cast spells. And so, when we're writing something, it's called spelling for a reason. So thank you for that distinction, and just bringing attention. If you could have, just because you have building materials that are quote unquote healthy, doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not building and you don't know how to build a home in the proper way, you could be compromising your health in some way, or compromising the building structure in some way if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and as an owner builder build, it's easy to get caught in some of the traps of doing things pretty well, but not as well as it could be done. And because there's a lot of things to learn, and it takes a while to learn those things. So you could be doing something as well as but there's something out there that is a better way to do it, that's more durable and less prone to mold growth in the walls and things like that. But you only learn those things as you do them, or by reading a ton and talking to other people who have probably run into that at some point, so know how to avoid it.
Yeah. And so you probably have a lot of people's attention with the word mold. It's a 4-letter word that a lot of landlords and contractors and insurance agencies and like homeowners just don't want to hear that word. So what are some measures and preventative things that can be done in the building process to be wary of something like water intrusion, water damage, which can then cause mold growth? What kind of things are you doing when you're building a home to be a little bit on the precautionary side?
Yeah, and I just want to put this out there before I get too far into this, but I'm not a building biologist. I am somebody I'm not even an architect. I haven't taken the test to be a registered architect. I'm what you would call a residential designer at this point, just unlicensed, but architecture training. So building biologists will have more training when it comes to how to keep mold out, how to remediate mold, how to deal with it, and which materials might work better, or which materials might actually look good, but then in the end might not be. So I would recommend, if you're going down this path of building a house, to contact a building biologist. They're very few and far between, or even taking building biologist courses yourself and becoming one yourself, and jumping on that train of helping others educate themselves or educate others to the reality of what buildings and health, where they connect, where they cross.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for distinguishing that. it is really important to find someone who understands the building as a whole. And that's why we work as a team, right? Like that's why you would have a building biologist. That's why you'd have an architect. That's why you would have someone like you on the team. You would have a whole team of people just to get different lenses and perspectives and expertise. And a little plug I'll put in for the Building Biology Institute. I did take some coursework through the Building Biology Institute. I am not a fully certified building biologist myself, but a building biology advocate. And that is one series of coursework that you can take. They have a lot of free information on their website as well around EMF and building materials, and they have webinars every so often. And that's buildingbiologyinstitute.org. So that is a good resource to bookmark. You can also find an expert near you, depending where you're at by state or zip code. And there tends to be a lot more building biologists last time I checked over on the west side of the state, not so much in like the Midwest and Michigan. I know when I first started this journey, it was challenging to find someone who knew what they were talking about in terms of building health in Michigan, but perhaps that landscape's changed. But go check that out if you are looking for someone or want to learn a little bit more about building biology.
Yeah, I can ditto that, having a building biologist on the team, if health and toxicity is a high priority, then definitely have a building biologist on the team. If it's not such a high priority, then maybe it's not needed. Or maybe you can have a short consultation with somebody early on and not hold them for the whole project. I am working on a project right now that we do have a building biologist on the team, and that's because the owner has toxic mold in her past, and it really did affect her health majorly, and so she needs to continue to build things that are going to be mold free, and so that having that building biologist on the team is really important. And she was telling us we've been doing things totally backwards, and we went through a whole EMF electrical design with her, and everything that we did on our last project was completely opposite of what she just told us to do. And so we came out of that meeting like, oh my God, just fist, hand palm.
Wow. So what were some of the things that were discussed during that?
And this was a EMF. And so EMF is, and do you know the acronym?
Yeah. So EMF stands for electric and magnetic fields.
Right.
Essentially,
so
like
it's
what we're being exposed to from phones and from cell phone towers and from electrical outlets in our home, something that you can't necessarily see, but is affecting our bodies.
Yeah, and so EMF has been kind of this aluminum hat kind of, it's had this connotation where crazy guy with an aluminum hat is worried about EMFs, and doing things that are just kind of kooky, right? But the field of research and the body of research is growing, and it's showing that EMFs are much more dangerous, and they can affect our bodies in a much more significant way. So yeah, and I'll just paraphrase what Kathy was saying. Kathy Cook is the building biologist we're working with, and you might be able to look her up and hire her on. And just to paraphrase what she was telling us about EMFs is dimmer switches are notorious for being dirty electricity, and maybe I'll just use the word dirty electricity. And some places that you find throughout the house that have dirty electricity are dimmer switches, LED lights, which was like, well, we're all trained that LED lights are the magic lighting solution for climate change. So she was like, well, you should use incandescent lights. And we were like, I don't think we can do that. So, working on your priorities of And you have to balance these: health, climate change, durability, availability, affordability. These all play major roles in how you design and how you build these homes. What else? The meter and panel where the electricity comes into the house is a massive place where EMFs exist. And if you're doing like an off-grid solar system, the battery bank and the inverter, that's the same kind of thing as your meter and entry. So there's ways to build a box around that to reduce the EMFs or capture them in a room. So trying to keep your batteries out of and away from your sleeping areas is one of the most important things, one of the first steps to take.
Mhm.
But then there was also like, how do you ground the house? There's an easy way to ground the house with the rebar and the footing. It's called a UFER. And she was like, yeah, you can't use a UFER because that just electrifies your whole house. And so that's putting EMFs all the way in everything. So don't do that. So then you have to put an 8-foot grounding rod in the ground, which is difficult, but it's something you got to do to keep EMFs out of your house. And then using plastic boxes instead of metal boxes in your walls. If you're doing a rammed earth wall, use plastic boxes, not metal, because that metal wall will then ground your entire wall, and now your entire wall is electrified. And so now you're just pushing EMFs through your entire building instead of minimizing them. So
yeah, those are some big ones. Thanks for sharing. And then some other things that I think of, which I hadn't thought of, the wall piece, because I'm not a builder, so I'm not doing that piece of it, but it even shows you it goes down to the foundation level. One really easy trick also is turning your Wi-Fi off at night. And hardwiring. I'm not sure if that's something that came up, but hardwiring at home can be really helpful. I had a client who was only sleeping for like 4 hours at a time and like really struggling to get high quality sleep. They hardwired their house, removed all Wi-Fi, and within a week she was sleeping 10 hours. And it was just by changing the Wi-Fi. So if you're in an apartment complex or a condo, it might be a little bit harder to do. But if you have more control, and you're living in a house, and you are able to turn off the router, that's super beneficial. And if you can't, knowing like where the router is at, or knowing where the dirty electricity spots are at. The place that I'm at with right now, my friend has an EMF meter. And so when she got here, she was measuring the places, and we actually unplugged a couple things and shifted things. That can just be really helpful to know where you're sleeping, like where the EMF fields are, where the magnetic fields are when you're sleeping, because that could change like the orientation of where you're at in the room, and maybe your head's on this side and not by this wall that's producing massive currents. So those are things that sometimes when we can't see them, like when we can't see the EMF and we can't visibly see like mycotoxins and mold spores, those things are a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around unless they've physically gotten sick from that or know someone that has and know the importance. But just because it's invisible doesn't mean that it's not playing a huge role in your house.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And something that I was introduced to is, if you can't turn off your router, at least put your phone on airplane mode when you go to sleep. So that will at least like stop the Wi-Fi coming into your phone, which is probably by your head, because that's where we keep our phones mostly for alarms and stuff now too.
Right. Yeah. Or just get like an old fashioned alarm,
Mhm.
I try to go to sleep with the sun and wake up. Now it's harder because it's getting dark so early, but I'm pretty good about waking up early in the morning with the sun. And if you can get into that rhythm of waking up without your phone, that's an anomaly, but so
Yeah, totally. And how do you do that with your house? You can design in a big window that faces east in your bedroom, so
Mm,
that when the sun comes up, it lights up your room and you wake up.
yeah, and
This
that
is
goes
something
into
that I've experienced personally. You know, when the sun's
um,
coming up and it comes and hits you in the morning, and you'll get up.
yeah, there you go. So talk to me about, and that goes hand in hand with passive heating and cooling too, right? The direction that
Mhm,
you're building your home. Can you talk a little bit about that?
mhm.
Besides orienting your windows to east, what else goes into building like passive heating, cooling, that orientation?
Right. And yeah, and let me, excuse me, let me just make a distinction between passive house and passive solar building.
Okay.
It's two very different things. They're using the same word, which is a little bit off, but passive house is, it's very much an active system of designing something. And passive solar is using, it's a much more passive, less active, there's less mechanical systems in a passive solar house. That it's the way you orient your building to the sun and the way you might naturally ventilate your house. So in a passive solar situation, you're really using thermal mass or high insulation or a combination of them. And you're using your windows as your heaters. So you orient your building depending on where you are in the equator, towards the south and towards the southeast or the morning sun. And you want to kind of turn your building towards the morning sun so you catch that sun and start heating up your building as early as possible, especially if you're in a cold climate. So yeah, you want to let that sun come in, and you want that sun to drop and heat up some kind of thermal mass in the house. If it's the floor or a rammed earth or adobe or earthen wall in the house, that'll help hold some heat throughout the day and even into the night if it's done really well.
Mm.
Um, and it'll reduce the amount of heating that you have to do in an active way. If it's a wood stove or a mini split or a furnace, whatever that might be, those are the active systems, and the passive system is nature,
Mm.
or the sun as your heater.
Have you been to Arco Santi yet?
I haven't, but I know all about it.
So Arco Santi is a little community, or it was intended as a community, and right
It
now
is.
it is still, yeah. And it has some beautiful architecture. I visited there when I first moved to Arizona, and all of their, not all, but a lot of their buildings use the passive solar techniques. And
Mhm.
I was amazed because it was about like 98 degrees maybe when I went there. It was during the summer, maybe a little bit warmer. And I stepped into one of the buildings that didn't have air conditioning. And just the way that it was oriented and the building materials that it was made out of, it felt so much cooler. It was at least like a 15 to 20 degrees difference.
Mhm.
So, and it was just amazing because that was the first time that I had experienced that type of
Mhm.
using the sun and the elementals to heat or cool down a building. And I was thinking like how, just from a health perspective and from like, getting out of the heat, that was amazing. But then from an environmental perspective, how much could we be saving? And especially in a state like Arizona, in terms of utilities and
Mhm.
electric bill and air conditioning.
Yeah, Arcasante is a great place, and it's one of those pioneering places and communities that had the vision of passive solar design, and was actually able to build a bunch of the buildings to prove that passive solar design actually worked, and it still works. And passive solar design is not only about heating the building, but it's about cooling the building as well. And I'll say this also, that the distinction between passive house and passive house uses all of the passive solar principles, and then adds layers on top of that get more scientific and physics based. But the general rule is use passive solar design, and then, you know, make it work for a healthier, low energy product.
Mhm.
But yeah, shade is also an important part, especially here in Arizona. It's mostly a cooling environment, so we're
Mhm.
cooling our houses more often. So growing shade or providing shade for our buildings to naturally cool in the summertime is also an important part. So we use our gray water to water shade trees on our western side that will then shade our houses in the summer.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a whole whole systems approach.
Mhm.
So
There's
in
also another thing about forced air and radiant heat
Mhm.
that I like to bring up, that this passive solar version where you're using the sun to heat up your space, it's not, and or let me say this, that the mechanical version is blowing air around your space. So anything, any particulates or dust or particulate matter that might be in the house, it's going to be blowing, the forced air is going to be blowing all that stuff around.
Mhm.
And so that's going to be up in the air. You're going to be breathing that. It's going to be moving around. And so that is going to affect your indoor air quality massively. So if you do, so I think you want to kind of prioritize radiant heat instead of forced air or air movement as a way to heat and even cool. There's ways to cool your house that don't have the air conditioner blowing air all over the place.
Mhm.
And it's the particulate matter that matters.
Yeah, I agree. And that goes back to your house has a breath. It and partially that that's
Mhm.
that's in building biology that they talk about. Your house it has a breath. And like if you think of your walls as your third skin, um, your first being your actual skin, your second being your clothes and like what you're wearing, and then the third being the building walls. They all play a role in health. And just like your normal skin is very, you can put lotion on your body or soap on your body, and you're absorbing that through your skin. The air that's circulating and coming out from the outside and the inside is affecting your indoor air quality. And I'll say the house that I was living in Michigan, and a lot of clients that I see that have mold issues in their house, they think, or sometimes they're told like, oh, well, the issues in my basement or the issues in my son's bedroom. So it's not affecting the rest of the house the same way. You might have more of an issue in one room, but because you do have a forced heating, you have an HVAC system. In my case, the mold issue was in the basement and our HVAC system was also in the basement. It's then spreading that throughout the entire home. Whereas a home that I
Yeah.
lived in Colorado, did have radiant heating, and it was one of the cleanest homes that I've lived in. And I think it was because that HVAC system forced heating was taken out of the equation. And also like pristine mountain clean air where we were living. But that plays a huge role. Especially when you're talking about a home that might be bigger, and like how often are you cleaning the HVAC system, especially in a place like Arizona where it's monsoon season for part of the year, and our homes are like shut up for a bit, and maybe we're not getting that air ventilation inside and outside coming
Mhm.
in. Those are all factors that play a huge role in our indoor air. So as someone who is using healthier building materials and looking at what type of heating systems we're using, what would be your dream home if you could construct something, say for me,
Mhm.
what are some of the considerations that you're taking into account when you're building?
Well, I think the number one thing we think about is because we can kind of see it and understand it is our wall systems. Our
Mm.
wall systems become what our house is. if it's a Strawbale house, it's a straw wall, or a cob wall, or hempcrete or rammed earth, whatever it is. And like that seems like that's the answer. But there's more layers that we have to consider. Rammed earth is probably what I would use, and raw rammed earth is what I would hope to do. There's some reasons you wouldn't do raw rammed earth, but raw rammed earth has the ability to balance moisture in the air, so it'll accept moisture and it will push moisture back into the room, according to humidity and temperature. Where stabilized earth, rammed earth, is less effective that way. But it still works, it still does something.
And there's a term for that, hydroscopic. If you're in the biology world, the hydroscopic is that ability to absorb and deflect moisture. And that's what we want. Something, not building materials that are completely porous and are going to absorb the water and that moisture.
Right. So yeah, clay plaster is another hydroscopic material. Lime plaster is another one. Materials that are not hydroscopic are latex paints. Those are the toxic paints anyways. But there are non-toxic, VOC-free latex paints out there. And so you can choose them if that's like a budget concern, maybe that's a reason to do that because of budget. But plasters are much better suited for indoor air quality and for this hydroscopic qualities. So, might choose rammed earth, but if we couldn't do rammed earth for whatever reason, maybe it's we don't have suitable earth nearby. Maybe we're building in Hawaii and we can't get the soil we need, or the price of it is too much, then we might look at a plaster method. And Strawbale is one of my next highest choices, something I would choose next. I have heard that straw bales, they carry a mold load in them just naturally. There's mold just kind of flying around, and straw bales kind of collect that and offer a pretty good place for mold to grow. So even your fresh bales might have some mold spores growing in them. So you can use straw bales like carefully. And if you plaster them in time, if you plaster them in time and don't offer an environment where mold can grow, then they can be a perfectly acceptable building material. Talking about mold, also, if you're doing a lime plaster instead of clay plaster, the lime plaster, the pH in the lime makes it so it makes an uncomfortable place for mold to grow. So mold doesn't typically grow in lime plaster. I think you will see mold growing like in old exterior lime plaster efforts, like in old Italy. There's black stuff growing on, there's black stuff on your lime plaster. That's mold from the rain and the elements over time. So I've also seen people adding chili powder in the lime plaster to help create a place where mold doesn't want to grow even more.
Interesting. How does the chili powder
right? So there's something in the capsaicin that the lime and the capsaicin work together to make a place that's more inhospitable to mold.
That's so interesting. Okay. Might add a nice little color too if you're adding.
It might make it kind of pink. And there might be ways to like spray chili water on moldy spots too.
Interesting. Yeah.
In that kind of respect. What we found, and this was a recent finding in Elfrida, was if you do have mold growing in your plaster, use hydrogen peroxide, and it did the best to get rid of the mold and keep it from coming back. We did try vinegar and lemon juice and borax and a combination of all three of those, and hydrogen peroxide was the thing.
Gotcha.
So, those are wall systems. Wall systems are just one part of it, right? There's insulation in the ceiling as well. The insulation you choose, there are more mold resistant and less mold resistant insulations, and there are more toxic and less toxic insulations. I think on the toxic side, fiberglass is super toxic, and the little particles will fly around in the air and get in your throat, and you can feel them right away. You can feel it on your skin. It's really tough to work with. Fiberglass. Spray foam is another place where it's seen as a miracle. It's super high insulation per R value, or per R value per inch. It really closes up a lot of the air gaps and stuff because it's sprayed on. But it's super toxic stuff for us in a close range environment, plus global warming or climate change lens. It's putting off a bunch of greenhouse gas emissions by the sprayers. There's some soy sprayers that are on the market now that have this like, oh, we fixed the problem. We're using soy products now, but they're barely doing anything.
Yeah, it's kind of like the word vegan on certain products, and you flip over the label and it's like, cool, it's vegan, or cool, it's gluten-free, but it's full of this soy and like things that aren't actually maybe food edible. It kind of sounds like the same thing for the buildings. And not only is it having a detrimental effect on the environment, and then also like the person living in the home, but for you, I'm thinking of this for you and for the builders and for people that are working on the homes before someone's living in them. It benefits you to be working with natural, healthy building materials, not only for all those reasons we just mentioned, but for your own health. And
yeah, totally. And it's kind of a new conversation that's happening now. Is the health of the builders, the health of those that are installing these things. And if you're installing spray foam in PPE all the time, then you're inhaling this stuff. You can only protect yourself so much. If you're doing it all the time, you are potentially going to get cancer from it. And that's spray foam is foam is a 4-letter word for us at Natural Building Works. And there's people that will disagree, but the body of research is growing on why foam fails. And there's a great article on 475supply.com, or was it 475.com? They're a passive house material supply shop, and they have a great article called Why Foam Fails. And they go into more depth of why foam is a great material that it's claimed to be. So I recommend reading that. Don't just take my word for it, but read that and other things. But also say that foam, and there's asbestos was a big deal, and fiberglass, installing those things, those are like the bad materials we know are bad that can affect your health. But natural materials, they can also do the same thing. If we're using lime can be really caustic, or is really caustic. And if you're using lime all the time in hempcrete or lime plasters, you're inhaling it, it can really, really affect your lungs. Even clay plasters or straw, they have silica in them, and silica has been recognized as a caustic agent and is on the California Prop 65 list. Silica is a thing that you don't want to be inhaling. So when you're working with natural materials, you still have to be considerate of your health and wear ventilators and wear masks when you're working with it.
Yeah.
And wear gloves if you're working with cement or lime. It will burn your hands. So these are all part of the working with the stuff. If you're going to go out there and build your own house, these are some things you got to know about to protect yourself while you're building it.
And I think it comes down, it's just like food is medicine in a way of, there's certain herbs that can be really beneficial, or certain foods, but if you're taking too much of them, or you're not sure how you're taking the herb, or you're not taking it as intended, and you're just throwing things at your body, you can have ill effects. So same thing, I think, is what you're saying with the building materials.
Mhm.
Also being careful about where you're sourcing it, right? Like granite can be radioactive. So making sure you know where you're also sourcing certain materials,
Mhm.
so you're not further exacerbating health issues.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, not like a problem, like it's a problem, but it's a big problem to solve. It's a big puzzle, or maybe that's a better word. It's a big puzzle. There's a lot of different parts, and you really have to go down a rabbit hole on each one of these pieces. If it's indoor air quality, or radioactivity, or EMF, or mold, and there's probably things that we don't even know about that are affecting our health. That there might be some new horizons of research coming out that show these other places of concern.
Yeah, and what's really wild to me is earlier this year, my parents visited Sedona this summer for the first time, and we went and checked out some ruins. There's the Casa Grande ruins not too far. Sorry, not Casa Grande,
Mhm.
Montezuma Castle ruins that aren't too far from here. And I
Mhm.
don't know how many, maybe you know how many years old, but thousands of years old. And the ruins are still standing, but they lived in such a more simple way. They didn't have
Mhm.
insulations in their home, in their houses. They did build their homes up really high into the mountain wall to stay away from predators and just be in safety. They had to use ladders to get up to their home, but their houses are still standing the way that they built it. There's some
Mhm.
crumble, but the windows are still intact. Everything is still there. And so I think if we can turn to ancient civilizations and see how they built their homes and see how certain ruins are still left standing, and see what they
Mhm.
made it out of, and use that as a foundation, and then obviously adding more to the comforts that we have and that we live with, um,
Mhm.
can be a good starting point.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to look. Um, you know, one of the things I do in my architectural design is look to the past to step forward. Is one way I put it. So we look into ancient techniques, ancient philosophies, ancient ways of living, and learning from that to then step forward to the future and say, how can we live as modern people in the healthy, safe way that we want to be living?
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to ventilation before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
And, we were talking a lot about indoor air quality a little while ago and then moved into kind of wall assemblies. But indoor air quality um, is a major part of this. And something that I've learned more and more about through my passive house training is continuous fresh air ventilation with heat exchange. And I just want to put this out to everybody because this is a place where it's way more important than our common sense education leads us on to believe. And especially if we're talking about, um, you know, toxin, um, removing toxins from the air or eliminating toxins from the air, um, building these healthy houses. That fresh air ventilation and continuous fresh air ventilation is one of your best places to combat toxins in your spaces
Mhm.
or to get rid of them. And so having an ERV an ERV is or an HRV. It's a system that pulls air in, it puts it through a heat exchanger and gives you fresh air, and then it pulls air out. And so it switches your air, and it's called an air change. And in the codes, there's requirements for air changes per hour.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's really an essential piece of the puzzle that yes, you want to choose your wall assembly that is mold-free and hydroscopic.
Mhm.
Is that the right word? Um,
Microscopic, yeah.
and right. And you want to choose your windows that they won't be uh, condensating or whatever. You want to choose high performance windows, but you also really need to put a continuous air ventilation in the house. And there's different levels that come at different prices. And it really needs to be a mandatory thing for health, for a healthy home, is this fresh air ventilation. So you're taking toxins out of the house and you're bringing fresh air into the house, is a really, really, really important part of the process, or
Mhm.
the package of the design.
Yeah, and what about in a place like Phoenix or New York or something like a city like Los Angeles where the outdoor air is really polluted?
Right.
Is there a solution for that?
Yeah, and I think that's becoming more and more apparent to us, that if you're living in the city, and sometimes the outdoor air is worse quality than the indoor air. So then you take you get your fresh air ventilator with MERV filters.
Mhm.
And the MERV filters there's MERV 15s and 13s and different numbers that have different levels of filtering. So yeah, you use those to filter out the particulates and the pollution that's outdoors and give you fresh air,
Yeah,
to bring that fresh air inside. And yeah, those MERV filters are going to be a really, really important part of this healthy home, this toxin-free home. The
totally.
MERV filters are going to pick up things and filter them out, compared to the cheaper ones. The cheaper filters, they're not going to do as much than a MERV filter will. MERV filters are going to be more expensive, but it's worth it.
Worth it to filter it out. So I actually partner with I don't know if you're familiar with Nano Air Solutions, but they have
I'm not.
13 residential air filters, really
Mhm.
high quality. Um, I don't remember what kind of sale or discount they're running, but if you use my code Mary, you can get a discount on MERV 13 filters. They were originally used in hospitals and in just medical grade buildings, and then with everything happening with COVID, they switched it over to allow individuals to use it. But essentially, how as you go up in MERV ratings, typically speaking, because it's a thicker filter, maybe the air wouldn't be able to get through as much in the HVAC system and could cause some sort of like moisture, humidity buildup. But with these, it's more like a spider web where it's still really breathable. I'm getting a little message on my Zoom saying we're almost out of time. But it's really these MERV 13 filters are really breathable, and it's like a spider web, where it's still catching everything it needs to, but it has that breathability factor. I don't know if they make filters for that air exchange ventilation system you're talking about, but that would be
Mhm.
interesting to look into.
Yeah, each one of these air exchangers, they come with MERV filters. They might be an add-on, but it's worth getting that add-on.
Yeah, and then simple ventilation, like opening your windows and doors. Yesterday here in Sedona, it was 67 degrees and it was so beautiful that we just had the window open all day,
Mhm.
the door open all day
Yeah,
to let
there's
fresh air in.
yeah, there's definitely places where natural ventilation works, and there's places where it doesn't work, where it's -19 in the Midwest right now. You can't open that window. So having that having that ERV or HRV, um, bring in bring in that fresh air, and it's a heat exchanger, so whatever the air temperature is inside is pushing out, and there's a heat exchanger that's collecting that heat, that the air coming in then picks up some of that heat, so then you don't have to heat the outdoor air as much, so you're not running your heater as you're bringing in fresh air.
Yeah,
So that's an
that's
important part.
true. Not everyone has the luxury of being in sunny Arizona all year round. And even still,
Right.
we were talking before this call, there was a snowstorm. We had snow last week. So yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that's that is the challenge, and also the excitement around building around different climates and knowing what works for different areas, which could be a whole another conversation.
Right.
Well,
And yeah, before we move on, let me throw this at you. We're talking about ventilation and toxins in the air. There's a there's something I learned, and the saying goes, eliminate, then ventilate, then respirate. So if you're thinking about the toxins in the house, first you want to eliminate them. And then if you can't eliminate them, then you want to ventilate the room. And if you can't ventilate the room, or the ventilating is not doing enough, then you put a respirator on, then you respirate the person. And so that's like the order of operations when you're thinking about the toxins in the air.
Interesting. I like that. That makes sense.
And this comes from like labs and hospitals and kind of thinking behind there.
That makes sense. So are there any other words of wisdom or nuggets that you want to share as we wrap things up here? We can always do a part B.
Back to you. Right. Yeah, there's just one more thing I'd like to add, because I have worked with some clients that had toxicity issues, and I will say that these clients are the most difficult clients to work with because the issues are so important. These toxicity issues are so important to them. So I just want to offer a little advice from my side to anybody listening that is going to endeavor on building a house, that it's really about trust. And it's difficult for somebody coming in with health issues from toxicity to trust any of the information that anybody else says, because there's so much conflicting evidence or information out there that becomes hard to manage, hard to sift through. You can't tell if you can trust the person and the information they're giving you. So I just want to offer that, you have to do your research, and then you have to find someone that you trust. And if you don't trust somebody and the information that they're coming with, then let them off the hook and go continue your research, continue your search to find someone that you do trust and work with them. Because from our side as a designer, if you're coming at us without a certain amount of trust, then it makes it really, really difficult to get you what you want, get you what you need.
Yeah, it sounds like it needs to be a collaborative, open communication, both ways.
Yeah, totally. And having that building biologist expert on the team is going to be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. For someone who is looking at building their house, their home, and they're like, we covered so much today, there's a lot of information that can feel overwhelming. Where would you say to start to find someone that you trust and is knowledgeable? And obviously that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I think just searching out on the web, architects and designers and builders that do say that they're qualified or interested in building healthy, low carbon, high performance buildings. I think that's the best place to start. Finding a building biologist through the school that you mentioned. And just kind of assembling the team. You got to interview a bunch of people and you got to assemble a team, and embark on the journey as a team, as a collaboration.
And so having a whole team of people, that sounds expensive. What if you don't mind sharing, what kind of like ballpark? I know you're working with different clients, and the home in Alfredo was a tiny home, Strawbale, and then there's larger scale projects. For someone wanting to build their own home, what is there a typical starting range?
It's really changing rapidly all the time, but if you're building it yourself, like I would, like the hopes and dreams of a $30,000 house are long gone. Like you cannot do that, even building it by yourself. So building by yourself, you should really try to start with $75,000, and it's probably going to cost 125 if you have all the time in the world and you're not looking to move in for like 3 or 4 years. Like, it takes forever to build these things. It's costing a lot. And if you have a contractor or a builder on the team, you probably want to have 150 or $200,000 to start, with something you think is small. It's like 30 by 15 or 30 by 30. Like, you still need $100,000 or $200,000 to do that. And that doesn't even include permits or land or things like that. Like, it's costing a lot of money to build things right now.
And water and electric on that land, if it's not present, there's a lot that goes in.
Utilities is a whole nother thing. So it's big investment, but it's worth it for your health, and especially if you have problems living in rentals where you can't make the changes you need to.
Yeah. So it's, once again, it's that, what does your health cost, and what is it worth to you, and prioritizing, maybe saving up for that healthy home. So for people who, how we met was through a building workshop. So for people who want to learn more about building homes in a healthy, sustainable way, how can they register or sign up for one of your workshops?
Yeah, so you can follow me and the work we're doing on naturalbuildingworks.com. And Instagram is a place where we're most active on social media. So we're sharing what we're working on and sharing volunteer dates as they open up. And we're also offering workshops for rammed earth specifically. And we do offer 2 versions of ways to learn, where we have volunteer and learn sessions, which is what you came to, Mary, which is, for people with more time than money, where you come and you help somebody with their project and you learn as you do. It's not a place where we're going to sit down and talk about all the details about every little thing that we're doing, but it's a place where you can get into stacking straw bales, learning plaster, learning all the other weird stuff that you have to do to build a thing. And these volunteer and learn sessions are free. They might be remote, they might be in Tucson, but that's a great way to learn. We also offer rammed earth workshops for tuition that really take you a little bit deeper into the understanding of how to build with rammed earth. And we're working on offering more resources for owner builders or for people in the process at whatever step they are in the process, at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. Natural Building Works is a design build company, so we do offer services from design to build all the way through. We do like to build what we design, so we don't really take on projects that are designed by somebody else and then build them, unless there's special circumstances that I'll say, okay, we'll do that.
Gotcha. Cool. Good.
So yeah, check us out, naturalbuildingworks.com.
So go give him a follow if you want to learn a little bit more. And I think one of the best ways to really learn is to get your hands involved, and to, as much as you could study the theory and like read a book or a blog article, the best way is really to get your body moving and working and building. Even if you're not planning on actually building the home yourself, I think it's important what goes into it. So thank you so much for sharing your time today and your expertise. And I learned a lot, and I hopefully that people watching did. If you found this episode interesting, or if you know someone that this could benefit, please share and subscribe to the podcast, our YouTube channel, depending where you're watching this. And thank you so much, Ray, for coming on.
You're so welcome. And good luck on your journey.
Thank you.